Crafty fam, it's Alex Vanover and welcome back to my sublimation series. This is episode number 4 where I'm going to compare sublimation to HTV for you and explain all of the differences. My goal with the sublimation series is to not only explain the things that I found pretty confusing about sublimation, but it's also to give you the information and everything that you need to start sublimating on your own. So if you're not already subscribed to my YouTube channel, DIY Alex, make sure to hit that big subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so that you get notified every time that I post a new episode of the sublimation series or another video at least every single week. So let's jump into this episode. So let's begin by talking about sublimation. I'm going to explain what it is and a little bit about how it works. Sublimation designs are printed out using sublimation ink onto sublimation paper. Then they have to be transferred using relatively high heat and a relatively long amount of time onto sublimation blanks. Sublimation blanks could be hard surfaces that have a polyester coating on top of them, or a shirt or piece of fabric that has at the very least 50% polyester content. Now, the closer that you get to 100% polyester in shirts or garments, the brighter that the sublimation ink will be. However, once the ink is pressed onto that sublimation blank, the good news is that as long as the polyester content is high enough, then the ink will be fused into the surface of the shirt or the blank for the rest of the life of the shirt. One of the benefits of sublimation designs is that you can have as many colors in your sublimation designs as you want, and you press them all at once, so it's not labor intensive to have a super colorful design. But one of the main limitations of sublimation designs is that you cannot use the color white. And the reason for that is because printers do not have white ink to print, so white cannot be a part of your design. But typically, since sublimation blanks are either white or light colored, that's not usually really much of an issue. Another thing to understand about sublimation designs is that there's never going to be any texture. Sublimation ink will take on the surface of the shirt or the blank that it's been applied to, so there's never going to be any texture on top of the shirt or the blank. So for example, you could print out, say, a glitter texture, but you'd never be able to feel it on the surface of the shirt because once the ink is on the blank, it will just take on the texture of the blank that it's been applied to. As far as equipment needed for sublimation, first you'll need a computer to create your own designs or print them off. Secondly, you'll need a sublimation printer in order to print your designs. And lastly, you'll need a heat press. Now, you can get away with not having a sublimation printer right away if you want to purchase pre-printed sublimation designs from places like Etsy. But obviously, in the long run, in order to print them yourself, you'll definitely need a sublimation printer. Now, you do pretty much need a heat press to get enough heat to apply sublimation designs. However, Cricut Easy Press 2s do get hot enough to do sublimation, so you can use an Easy Press 2 if you have one of those. Notice that I didn't mention a Cricut machine because a Cricut machine is not required. There's no cutting and no weeding, so you can just get away with a computer, a printer, and a heat press for sublimation. Next, let's talk about heat transfer vinyl, or the abbreviation HTV. HTV is cut by a die cutting machine, say for example a Cricut machine, and then it needs to be applied using relatively high heat but a relatively short amount of time. The amount of pressure required to apply HTV depends on the type of HTV that you're using. And once it's applied, it's always going to be visible on the surface of the shirt, so it doesn't sink into the texture the way that sublimation does. But different types of HTV are more obvious on the surface of the shirt than others. So for example, a matte HTV, like this fluorescent Starcraft Softflex, is much more likely to have like a screen printed type of look on the surface of the shirt than say something thicker, for example, like glitter HTV, which is much thicker and much more obvious on the surface. Though HTV is considered permanent once it's applied to the shirt, you can experience things like cracking and peeling with your HTV over time, because sometimes the time, temperature, and pressure were not used correctly for the type of HTV that was being applied, so it can cause cracking and peeling. You can work with multiple layers of heat transfer vinyl to create multiple color designs. But since each color layer is separate, you're not going to be able to achieve a watercolor type of look the way that you can with sublimation unless you're using something like pattern vinyl, for example. But since all the color layers are separate, it just doesn't look quite the same and have quite as good of a flow as it does when you're doing it with sublimation. But one big benefit to heat transfer vinyl is that you can use white HTV. So you can use white heat transfer vinyl on any color of blank that you want, and it's never an issue, which is a limitation with sublimation. As far as the fabrics that you can apply heat transfer vinyl to, you're much more flexible in your choices since HTV applies at a lower temperature. Some of the most common options are polyester, cotton, and cotton polyester blends, but some other fabrics work fine with HTV as well. You're also not limited in any way with color whenever you're working with heat transfer vinyl. You can use whatever color of HTV that you want, as well as any color blank that you want. Now, as far as equipment required for heat transfer vinyl, you'll need a device to connect to Cricut Design Space. So that could be a computer, tablet, or a cell phone. You'll also need a die cutting machine like a Cricut, weeding tools, and a heat source. The heat source could be an iron, easy press, or heat press, whichever you prefer. Now that we've summarized both sublimation and heat transfer vinyl, let's do a head-to-head comparison and talk about the differences. As far as equipment required, sublimation requires a computer, a printer, and a heat press. For heat transfer vinyl, you'll need a device that can connect to Cricut Design Space, so that could be a computer, a cell phone, or a tablet. You'll need a die cutting machine like a Cricut machine or another brand, weeding tools, and a heat source. But the heat source you're a little bit more flexible in. You could use an iron, an easy press, or a heat press. Next, let's compare the two different textures. Sublimation designs are always going to be fused into the surface of the shirt or the blank, so they don't really have any texture on their own. Heat transfer vinyl, however, is always going to sit on the surface of the shirt, and it's always going to be able to be felt on the surface. However, HTV is also available in lots of different textures, including matte, glossy, glitter, puff, strip flock, and so much more. Next, let's compare their design flexibility. Sublimation designs can have an unlimited number of colors in them other than white, and the design is always pressed all at once, so multiple presses are never going to be involved. HTV, on the other hand, can be multiple colors, but you have to press each color in a separate layer. There are exceptions for things like pattern HTV and printable HTV, but that is a general rule that we follow, is that each color is going to be a different layer. However, HTV always has the option of using white. Next, let's compare the application differences between sublimation and HTV. In order for sublimation to work, the ink has to be applied to sublimation blanks. Sublimation blanks could be hard surfaces that have a polyester coating on them, or shirts or garments that have high polyester content. The color must also be white or very light in order for the ink to show. Technically, you can sublimate on darker colored fabrics if you bleach the design area before or after applying the sublimation ink. However, then you have to find blanks that bleach white underneath their color, and that kind of introduces a whole new set of complications. Ultimately, sublimation applies at a much higher temperature and for a much longer amount of time. As far as heat transfer vinyl, you're a lot more flexible with the type of fabrics that you can use with HTV. The most common are cotton, polyester, and cotton polyester blends, but since HTV applies at a lower temperature, you're more flexible in the different fabrics that you can use. Another thing to note about HTV is that you're not limited in color with the color of the blanks or the color of HTV when they're being applied. They also apply at a lower temperature and a much shorter time than sublimation. So as far as application goes, HTV is significantly more flexible. Lastly, let's compare the difficulty levels of sublimation and HTV. Sublimation has a lot more nuance in the settings that you need to apply your designs so that the color is bright and everything looks perfect. In my opinion, sublimation sounds a lot harder than it actually is, but because of all the nuance and the different things that may need to be adjusted, I would consider sublimation an advanced level craft. For heat transfer vinyl, most companies that produce it release all the cut and press settings that you need that will work for most crafters. So I would qualify HTV as a moderate level difficulty craft. If you're interested in learning more about sublimation, then I encourage you to continue watching my sublimation series. I'll go ahead and link the next episode on the next screen for you, and I'll have it linked down in the description below. If you're not already a part of one of my Facebook crafty fams, I would love to have you be a part of them. So I'll be sure to link both of my Facebook groups down in the description below. If you've made it this far in the video, then I really want to get to know you on social media. So please be sure to find me at DIY Alex Vanover on pretty much all major social media platforms. And I'll put direct links to all my profiles down in the description below. If you enjoyed this video and you want to see more just like it, then be sure to subscribe to the DIY Alex YouTube channel and be sure to ring the bell so that you get notified every single time that I put out a new video every single week. But don't wait for next week's video. Be sure to check out this one next. Or if you want to make your DIY dreams come true, be sure to check out this video. I know that you're going to love it.